This one is called Blessed to Be a Blessing. It's as simple as that. The portion of the Genesis story that led me to this reflection gives us Jacob's deathbed blessing of his sons. And some of those blessings are harsh blessings, and others sparkle with possibility. There are a few ways that you can read such blessings. First, perhaps there are just a flawed father's assessment of his many children, and he's couching his personal grievances and favoritisms in the language of blessing. Or you can see that they are actually from a future author, looking back and putting words in Jacob's mouth to describe what actually happens to the tribes that descend from each son. Or you could consider whether the blessing is in the candor, that Jacob is simply naming the realities that each of them will face as they seek to be true in their relationship with God's promise. The ability to name and nevertheless face reality is, after all, a gift. As is usually the case when reading sacred text, it's probably some combination of each of these ways of reading. If you want to read the blessings, head to Genesis 49 and read them there. After Jacob's deathbed blessings, there is one more chapter in the book of Genesis that wraps it up, sets the stage for what's to come. Which means here we are, having just about completed the walk through Genesis that I began earlier this year, just a couple weeks after Easter, and we've met quite a cast of characters along the way. The Creator God, Eve and Adam, Cain and the mothering God, Noah and his sons, Abraham, Melchizedek, Hagar and her boy Ishmael, Isaac, Rebekah and her twins, Jacob and Esau, Joseph, and all his brothers. We've moved through quite a slew of events and happenings and themes along the way: creation, transgression, murder, climate catastrophe, exploration, exploitation, jealousy, abandonment, banishment, picnics, wilderness survival, grief, true love, individuation, birth, deceit, betrayal, favoritism, gender expansiveness, xenophobia, trauma, accusation, resilience, forgiveness, reconciliation, and one of the most central themes in the book of Genesis, blessing. Much of Genesis functions as an explanation of why things are the way they are. Why are there many languages? Well, we get an answer in the story of the Tower of Babel. Why are we afraid of snakes? Well, we've got the story in the Garden of Eden to tell us about that. We see some of this in Jacob's litany of blessings for his sons, some of which are, as I mentioned, not particularly pleasant blessings, but you can imagine the readers of these blessings many generations later wondering, why did the tribe of Reuben settle outside of the Promised Land? Why did the tribe of Simeon get swallowed up by the tribe of Judah? Why was the tribe of Judah the royal line? Why was Zebulun such a maritime hub? Why are the Benjaminites such fierce warriors? These sorts of explanations offer one layer of meaning in the book of Genesis. But underneath these explanations, Genesis contains a narrative arc that begins in the stories of creation with the blessing of being alive and beloved and delighted over by the Creator of the universe, and it develops into an invitation to take that blessing and extend it beyond our own personal lives into the lives of others. And we hear this most directly in Genesis chapter 12, which is the hinge point where the book of Genesis shifts from mythic time to legendary time, and where the cosmic creator begins paying special attention to the legacy of one particular family. In Genesis 12:2, God tells Abraham, whose name is still Abram at the time, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." In fits and starts, that family grows into 12 tribes. And the number 12 represents completion in the Bible. The stories that we have visited during the past few months tell us again and again that the fathers and mothers that preceded the 12 tribes we're flawed. So, what we see in the book of Genesis is that even through an imperfect lineage, the promise of creation is completed. And what we do, if we choose to treat these stories as some kind of sacred, is that we let these stories invite us in. We are meant to find ourselves in sacred stories. In doing that, we can't avoid the reality that God calls each of us, no matter our flaws, to be part of the continuous process of completing creation. Now, understand, when I say God, I'm not speaking of a sky God who is detached from the affairs of earth, yet still somehow dictating them. When I say God, I'm not speaking of the creative force. When I say God, rather, I am speaking of the creative force and creative urge that has been shaping this world from the very beginning. I'm speaking of that force that spoke the cosmos into being with a word of delight. I'm speaking of the urge that shapes the hearts of those who honor creative life more than they do arbitrary rules. I'm speaking of the intimate longing that prods you to leave what's comfortable and set forth on the adventurous undertaking of becoming fully yourself. I'm speaking of the impulse to survive against the odds because you have something to say and make and birth into this world. I'm speaking of the one that keeps you up at night with dreams, the one that tears you apart with the possibilities that seem to be at war within you, the one that leaves you limping in your attempts to make sense of what it is that keeps ambushing your heart when you are at your most vulnerable. I'm speaking of the promise that steadies you when you feel alone in the pit of despair. I'm speaking of the creative force that was there at the beginning and stays with you at every step and every misstep along the way. It's that creative voice that you hear when you listen, and sometimes it whispers, sometimes it shouts, sometimes shows you, sometimes shoves you, always speaks, saying, be what I am. I am life, I am creative movement, I am dream, I am possibility, and so are you, so be it. Be who you are, be who we are. You bear the image of God, of the creative force that is in every breathing instance of life. You are blessed with that spark. As God says to Abraham and repeats to Isaac and extends to Jacob, you are blessed to be a blessing. That idea is meant to invite us in. We are meant to find ourselves in the idea that we are blessed to be a blessing, and then to respond to that idea as if it is the most sacred central call of our lives, as if life, ours and the entirety of creation, depends on our faithful response. In other words, if we attune ourselves to the stories of our beginnings, we can't avoid the reality that each of us, no matter our flaws, have the inherent qualities needed in order to be part of the continuous process of completing creation. Still, so many of us think that we have to get it perfect in order to offer something of value to a world so thirsty for creative blessing. We think that we have to complete ourselves before we can complete the world. It's normal to think that. It's natural. It's just not at all true. What is true is this. These characters whom we've encountered these past many weeks are our spiritual ancestors. They're a bunch of rascals, beautiful and flawed. And God's work is made complete through them. This too is true. Creation works in cycles and circles and seasons. Creation loves repetition. Creation is always recycling the beginnings, always completing itself, and always becoming complete through the likes of us. The only question you've got to ask is, how will you respond to the call of this creative way of being? Are you willing to be a creative blessing, or are you not willing to be a creative blessing? Those are really the only two choices. And hear this before you respond. It doesn't matter if you know exactly how to be a creative blessing, and it doesn't matter much if you have responded in destructive ways in the past. whether years past or just yesterday. It also doesn't matter what your dad or anyone else might have said or might say about you on their deathbed. All that the creative, for good or ill, all that the creative force behind the whole universe needs in order to bring this world to completion again and again is you, willing to be the blessing that you are. If you're willing, the way will find its way through you. Try it. Write it down somewhere, you'll see it. I am willing to be a creative blessing, and say it out loud every day for a week. And pay attention to what happens in you and through you. And let me know what you experience.